coaching. Kunoa coaching.
Welcome to the Kunoa podcast today, everybody. We've got Dave with us. Dave, how are you doing?
Doing fantastic. How are you doing today?
I'm great, thank you. And it is a real pleasure to have you on. You're called the Iron Tamer. So
Yes,
do you want to give us a background on how you got to where you are? Because I find this a fascinating backstory.
Sure thing. First, let's start with defining where I am for anybody who may not know anything about me. I am a professional performing strongman, keynote speaker, and mind coach. And I've been doing strongman feats since about 2007, and I've been doing it on stages as part of a keynote speech to deliver a message since about 2013. 2020 affected all that in a very everything got canceled kind of way. So I had been planning on doing an online coaching program that centered around the mental aspects of strongman training. And we'll talk more about that as we go along. And I launched that back in, I guess last year, like late 2020, early 2021 is when all that came to fruition. But how did I become a performing strongman? When I was a kid in the 70s, because I'm 52 now, when I was a kid, I was very overweight and had a really terrible stutter. I had a great deal of difficulty getting up in front of the class and doing book reports and stuff like that. And I also had a very outgoing personality. So I wound up getting in some mischief, not like terrible trouble getting, kicked out of school or anything like that, but I was disruptive and got picked on and made fun of very frequently, a lot of bullying going on because I couldn't speak well and I was overweight, and kids can be very harsh and very cruel in and around that, especially, we're going back 40 plus years. And just as a general rule, I think that society was less polite, not polite, but less understanding of people's emotional states at the time. So I was very enamored of comic books and science fiction and all of that sort of stuff. Really identified with the Incredible Hulk because he was indestructible and invincible, and he was fueled by this anger, and little 8-9-year-old me really identified with that. But it was all fantasy, right? And then I saw Lou Ferrigno on television portraying the Hulk, and something in my little child mind clicked and said, wait a minute, that is not a costume. That is a real man's body. And yes, he had on paint and prosthetic makeup and this sweet wig made out of yak's hair and all of that, but it was a guy and it was human. And so something in my mind switched as a little kid, and I didn't even realize it. And it took me years, decades, to be able to put it into those kind of terms. That there was a definite moment where a switch flipped in my mind, that it became humanly possible to be big and strong the same way that the superheroes in the comic books were. Not too long after that, I saw the movie Pumping Iron, which was centered around the 1975 Mr. Olympia, where Lou Ferrigno, playing himself, was in there competing against Arnold Schwarzenegger and all the other top bodybuilders at the time. And so there were these training segments of these huge superhero physique having men lifting weights and all that. And I'm like, that's the way to do it, because what I had been doing was like, I literally would go through the classified ads in the paper at the time, because this predates the internet by decades, right? And I would go and look for gamma radiation as an 8-year-old, because that was the only way that I could think to make it happen, right? But when I saw these guys lifting weights, I'm like, okay, to be able to pick up heavy things, you start by picking up lighter things and then gradually make them heavier over time. Got a set of weights for Christmas that year and put me on the path of strength training, which continues to this day. Along the way, I met my mentor, Dennis Rogers, who is a grandmaster strongman. He taught me how to do feats of strength, like bending steel bars, ripping decks of cards in half, breaking chains with no hands, with chest expansion, various different things like that. Really got involved in that. And around that same time, I was running a gym, kettlebell-centric gym. I had done a lot of stuff professionally in the kettlebell realm up to that point. And as a result of being an entrepreneur in that space, I was reading old school books on wisdom like that, like Science of Getting Rich, Think and Grow Rich from Napoleon Hill, Science of Getting Riches from Wallace Wattles, those sorts of things. And I realized that there was the golden age of old time performing strongmen and the golden age of that kind of of new thought, personal development stuff was happening at around the same time, late 1800s, early 1900s. And so that entire time period from, 100 to 130 years ago holds a very special place in my heart. And I realized that some of the things that I had learned as a strongman, for example, my mentor, Dennis Rogers, told me when I was working on a particularly difficult feat of strength that I was strong enough to do is driving a nail through a board with no hammer. And I had a mental block on it. He told me that you have to eliminate all fear and doubt and uncertainty from your mind because your mind controls your body. And I sat down, meditated on it a little bit, and then was able to do the feat like 10 minutes later. So the only thing that changed was my mental perspective on it. Comparing that to things that I read, say, from Napoleon Hill, where he said, whatever the mind of man can conceive and believe it can achieve, those two things resonated as almost identical statements to me. And so I realized that the things that I was using quite successfully with my physical expression of strength as a performing strongman applied to other areas of my life. So I started applying it to my business and to my relationships and started having great results all the way around with that. And so the next logical step as a teacher and coach is I've tested it on myself. I've gotten results that are valid. Let's test it out with people that I'm working with. So I started doing it with my in the gym clients, and they started hitting their goals better once we started addressing the mental aspects of things. We fast forward to now, and the primary stuff that I do is mental and mindset coaching, particularly understanding how to resolve conflicting beliefs and how to properly, effectively, I don't like the word properly, how to effectively use your imagination to put yourself in the position of having already accomplished the thing that you want, so that your subconscious mind is then impressed with that, and your body and the physical environment around you will then express that. So that's the short version.
This is actually really fascinating because there's many people, especially in kind of leadership, where they're consistently asking the same questions and they don't know what to do and they don't know how to do it. And as an entrepreneur and somebody who's trying to achieve, goals, it's a lot about mindset, because you can actually do them if you can change your mindset. However, getting somebody to change that mindset or resolve conflicting beliefs is really actually very hard. And sometimes people don't want to, or they're not in the place where they can get there. How do you work with people to be able to, is there, obviously there's not like a quick fix, but is there anything that people can kind of do to push themselves towards, I like how you said reflecting in the environment what they want to see, because this is kind of that manifestation. How do you kind of get people towards that goal of being able to have a good mindset?
My absolute favorite metaphysical new thought type of author is a guy named Neville Goddard, who was born in 1905, died in 1972. And one of my favorite quotes from Neville, and this appears in various writings of his and in various recordings and lectures of his as well. The words are changed slightly from location to location, but the essence of it is this: that to attempt to change your circumstances without changing your imaginal conversations and your imaginal activity is to struggle against the very nature of things, because our imagination is what creates our reality. The question of how do I get people to be willing and able to do that for themselves is actually quite simple. It seems hard, but it's really quite simple. I think that a lot of folks have difficulty with it because they've bought into the idea that it's hard, when really the truth is it's not difficult. It's just that you don't know how to do it. Anything's easy once you know how, right? So when someone expresses to me a desire for change of some sort, no matter what it is, physically, emotionally, financially, relationally, whatever, the first thing that I ask them to do is to observe what they're actually thinking and what they're actually saying in their internal conversations, and see if that matches up with what they say they want. Because if your internal dialogue doesn't match up with your desired external results, your internal dialogue will win every single time. If, for example, you're entrepreneurial and you're saying, I want to earn X amount of dollars, or I want to be abundant and prosperous and be wealthy, but in the back of your mind, you've bought into the idea that somehow if you have a lot of money, then you're not a good person. Or if you have bought into the idea that you have to work really, really hard and, work 120 hours a week to avoid working 40 hours a week for somebody else is the definition of an entrepreneur. When you buy into that, you set up a conflict between, I want this thing, but I believe this thing is something that is opposed to who I want to be. And so your self-concept, your self-image is what drives things, and that will always win. No matter what you decide that you may think that you want to do, or what you say that you want to do to other people, your internal conversations control everything. So I will have people to uncritically, and that's the operative word, uncritically look at what they are doing in their mind. What conversations are they having with themselves? Particularly, what conversation are you having with yourself about yourself? And if you spoke to yourself, like if someone else spoke to you the way that you speak to yourself when no one's listening, would that person be your friend or your enemy? And if you speak to yourself as if you were an enemy, then you have to get that resolved, or else you're just going to continue in that cycle.
I think it's quite what do I want to say? A contradiction when you've got a society that's telling you that you need to work a lot of hours and you need to earn this much money, and your mindset, you've already got a lot of beliefs set in there from growing up, and then you get told, well, actually, it's your mindset that's stopping you. And most people are going to say, well, it can't be, because I really want this and I want to do that. So then they've got to try and resolve that belief system in order to move forward. But then there's a fear that if they move forward, then they might actually even get what they want. And I see quite a lot of people stuck in that middle stage where they want to get it, they're making some actions to get it, but then at some point where it just gets a little bit difficult, they kind of just step back and say, I'm not going to do that anymore, it's just too much. What do you think kind of causes that little bit of doubt that brings them back?
I think that if someone is in a situation like that, where they're setting up this, and unwittingly, unknowingly, unconsciously setting up this conflict that is stopping them from being who they say they want to be, something in them, in their self-image, in their self-concept, and they may not even be aware of it. That is typically the case. They're probably not even aware of it, that there's something in there that is directly oppositional to who they say they want to become. As they start to follow the advice of the working from the outside in gurus who say things like you have to hustle and grind 24/7 and take massive action and all that kind of stuff, that stuff will work a little bit to get things going. And the people who succeed with that succeed in spite of it, not because of it. They succeed because by adopting those habits, they change their mindset and then wind up in the position they want to be in. A much simpler, more effective way is to change the beliefs, and then the beliefs will cause the actions to happen naturally, right? What would it be like if I were that person? Well, I would do this and this and this instead of that and that and that. Like if we're talking about health and fitness and losing weight, what would it be like if I were 20 pounds lighter? How would I feel? How would I act? Well, I would not be sitting on the couch eating, chips and watching TV for 5 hours a day. I would be doing these other things. So when we imagine ourselves in that position, we will and truly immerse ourselves in it and believe that that's who we are, we'll start to act that way. The problem comes when we work from the outside in and we start trying to do those things without changing the self-concept. Eventually, some results will start to happen. We'll start to get a little bit of traction, and our self-concept wakes up and says, wait a minute. Everything around here is changing. I'm the guy who's 20 pounds overweight. Me as a kid. I'm the fat kid with the stutter. If something in that changes, then I don't know who I am anymore. And so it can be a case of actually going through those changes and actually accomplishing the thing that you want to do is literally on a subconscious level, a threat to the identity. Because if I'm not the person who has a bad back, or if I'm not the person who's always running late, or if I'm not the person who doesn't manage money well, even though I don't want those things, if I'm not that person, then who am I? And that could be very scary on a subconscious level and wind up with self-sabotage. And that's why we have situations that I'm sure, I know I've been in them, and I'm sure that most of the people listening have been in them, that you will be just kicking major butt in the direction of a goal, and then all of a sudden you'll do something that is completely opposed to it. And you don't really want to do it. You're compelled to do it. And you know that it's a bad idea. You know that it's not going to help, and you know that it's actually going to cause problems. but you do it anyway. And you say, why did you do that? I don't know. But you know better than doing that, right? Yes. Then why did you do it? I don't know. Well, the reason is there's something in your self-concept that wants to stay in that place where they've survived. Sorry, I had a phone call coming in. But I stopped it. So there's something in the self-concept that would rather stay in that safe, familiar place than and suffer with the thing that's familiar rather than suffer the uncertainty of progress. But once that is adjusted and we realize that there's no need to suffer anywhere, that that's optional, that then we can just embrace the excitement of change. And typically when that happens, it's very, very rapid that people make the changes. At least in my experience.
That's fascinating. Some of the stuff that you kind of described there would maybe be termed as a victim mindset, where Absolutely. It's easy to stay in the familiar than it is to go into the unknown. And I think that fear of the unknown as well is quite worrying, because it's, well, if I start this business, will it work? What's going to happen? Who will I be? Mm-hmm. And that's quite difficult to come to terms with. What do you think are kind of the biggest lessons or motivations that you've because you had an amazing career. I mean, what do you think are the biggest lessons and motivations that you've got that have helped you move forward with your mindset?
I fully understand and grasp now at this point in my life what fear actually is and what it means. When we are born, when human beings are born, we're little tiny babies. And if anyone has children, particularly if they're very, very young, you can observe this for yourself. We are born with exactly two fears, no more, no less. Fear of falling or being dropped, and fear of loud noises. And both of those things are survival mechanisms that are hardwired into the nervous system as a startle response to some sort of external danger. So if those are the only things that are that come with us in our hard drive, that means that literally everything else in life that we're afraid of is a choice. Now, from very young up until about 7, we don't have a whole lot of choice as to what's being programmed into our subconscious. It's from our environment, it's from our caretakers, and people do the best they know how to do with what they have at the moment. So no one maliciously programmed anyone into being a sad, depressed, low self-esteem person. Typically, it's just, this is all I know. And so I'm passing it on, and I'm passing it on unconsciously. By becoming conscious of the fact that all fears, except for falling and loud noises, both of which can be overcome through practice once we have our reasoning faculty developed enough that we can understand that the physical, hormonal, chemical signature of fear and excitement is virtually the same on a cellular level. We can transmute our fear into excitement. We can use that fear, and not as a I'm going to face this fear and overcome it, but I'm going to use this fear as fuel, because what it's really telling me, if I take my my own interpretation out of it and I just look at it objectively, what it's telling me is something exciting is happening. And that means there's a potential loss, but that also means there's a potential gain. So by understanding that fear is essentially learned behavior, and any learned behavior can be unlearned or relearned to go from a place that it doesn't serve us to a place that it does serve us, then everything else can kind of work within that construct.
I've had this, and my example is, you know, when you go into a really high building and it's got a glass floor, mm-hmm. and you know that the glass floor is really thick and it's not going to fall out, and it's fine, and you can walk across it. I couldn't walk across it. Mm-hmm. And it took me ages to get myself onto this glass floor and actually walk across it without, I was literally dragging my body across it, because my body's like, no, this is dangerous. You can't do this. And I managed to get on there, and I managed to sit down on it and look down. And eventually the fear kind of started going away, and I'm observing things, and I'm thinking, this is actually really cool. I can see all these people. But it was a good half an hour, because that's just to try and make my body do something that was just like completely irrational to it was really hard. What do you think's going on there? Have you had anything like that where you've been kind of thinking, what am I doing? You're listening to the Kuinua podcast. If you want to ask a question to our experts, just go to kuinuacoaching.com and you will find the link to the podcast where you can leave us a voice message or send us an email and we will ask your question direct to the expert. That's kuinuacoaching.com. Kuinua Coaching is set up to offer mentoring, coaching and courses in leadership, negotiation and soft skills. If you're interested in finding out more about what Kuinua Coaching has to offer you, you can get in touch via Facebook, Instagram, you can type Kuinua into Google, you can email us on kuinuacoaching@gmail.com or go to our website at kuinuacoaching.com. That's kuinuacoaching.com.
Yeah. The idea there, in my experience, is that probably there was something along the way when you were too young to remember where something happened and you fell or almost fell and it was very scary to you, or you were way up high and you felt that fear and you backed away from it and you never went to touch it again. But then as an adult, you can be like, okay, I understand rationally that I'm not in any danger here, but the fear is still present. How can I address the fear? And so you did it in the example you just gave, from an external to an internal position, and it worked. I mean, could you go back and replicate that now, just like walk across that glass floor and not think anything about it?
Now that I've done it once, I'm fine to do it again, but it's that first time that does it for me.
Yeah, so you completely reprogrammed it, and you did it external to internal fairly forcefully, and it worked, and that's great. And that's what I was talking about earlier, that some people succeed in spite of it. You know, like the forcing yourself externally causes an internal change, and that's what you did. And I'm not completely opposed to that, but
it's hard. It is hard.
It's hard. It's uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And it's threatening, right?
Yeah.
To parallel that, or to contrast that with an experience of mine, going back to the story I was telling earlier about the nail drive with my mentor, Dennis Rogers. The way that feat is done, I have a small like washcloth, and I have a tiny like 1-inch square piece of leather glued into the center of it, and it's folded up, and the head of the nail goes against that piece of leather. That is all there for the protection of my palm, right? And that was a hard learned lesson, not for me, but for my mentor, Dennis, because the situation that happened to get caught on video. And it was like the first time I remember seeing this feat being done of you have to come with tremendous speed and 100% conviction. There can be no holding back, or you won't fully penetrate the board. He was doing a show, they had video running, and there was a malfunction with his rag that wound up, he didn't have the leather glued into it. That was an adjustment that we made after the fact. And yeah, see, I haven't even told you yet, and it's already.
I know what's coming.
Okay, so he winds up, and he has a board, and then on top of that, he has like a big frying griddle, like you would cook pancakes on, and then he has a license plate, and he's done this thousands of times, driving the nail through all of that and popping a balloon that's underneath the board. He comes around, he hits it, balloon doesn't pop. He pulls his hand back, he looks down. The nail, the head of the nail, the flat part, not the pointy part, but the flat part is embedded in his hand.
Oh my God.
And he's caught this on video, right? And I have a copy of the video, but he's never made it public because he doesn't want people to, have to endure this. He takes the camera crew with him to the emergency room and gets video of the extraction and the whole procedure. He turns out fine. He's ripping phone books in half 2 days later. Everything's fine. It missed all the important stuff in there and just went through soft tissue, right? So that turned out great. Okay, no problem. My first exposure that I remember of seeing that feat was that video. And so when I was trying to learn how to do it, I knew rationally and logically that I was taking all the necessary safety precautions. But every time I would come around to hit it, I could literally feel myself slowing down. And sometimes I would have these little flashes in my mind of Dennis with this thing sticking out of his hand. And so there was this deep rooted, that is very dangerous. We're not going to allow you to participate in that. Subconscious, controlling my nervous system, shutting things down so that I didn't have the speed or power necessary to complete the feat, but also didn't have the speed or power necessary to damage myself, right?
Yeah.
And I worked on this for months on my own and was never quite able to get there, and went and trained in person with Dennis. And he like looked over the technique and the safety, and I having him there observing me added a layer of safety that I didn't have when I was training on my own. But the most important part was when he looked me in the eye and he says, you've got to get all the fear, all the doubt, and all the uncertainty out of your mind, because your mind's controlling your body. And it clicked for me. So what I did is I went and sat down away from it was a group of us that we're training with. I went and sat down away from that group, kind of pulled a hat down over my eyes and isolated, put some headphones in, went inside. And I'm familiar when I was doing this, I'd already been practicing things like Qigong and meditation and pranayama for many years. And so, and a visualization type of thing. So what I did is I got very relaxed and I started imagining myself from first person point of view, driving the nail through the board. And I still kept feeling that resistance. And so I thought, okay, I can do anything I want to in here because this is imagination. I took the board away and put a balloon in its place, because that's one of the things that we do for showmanship on it. When the nail fully penetrates the board, it pops the balloon, and everyone, the people in the back row know what happened because you can't really see it up close. So I started just mentally rehearsing myself whacking the crap out of a balloon, popping it with the pointy end of a nail, because anyone could do that. Like I could give my 3-year-old a nail and he could go touch a balloon with it and it'll pop. It removed all the resistance, right? So it's not that I powered through the resistance of the board. In my mind, I just removed it. And I felt myself doing the thing. After about 10 minutes of that, I got up, went over, grabbed the nail, wrapped it up, boom, hit the board so hard that my knuckles impacted the board. And I got little, like little abrasions on my knuckles. So what changed? The only thing that changed was the way I was viewing the situation. So that took me about 10 minutes of just relaxed non-effort versus 30 minutes of clawing and forcing it, So both approaches are valid. I think that the changing it internally into what you want it to be and fully experiencing it is a far more effective and more pleasant way to do it. Because what I found happened, and this is true with my coaching clients as well, is that the thing that they're afraid of tends to just kind of melt. Well, the thing doesn't melt away, but the fear of it melts away. And like I had one client that I worked with who was so terrified of snakes that like if a photo of a snake was on the wall in a building that they were walking through, she would like have to go to the other side of the hallway and kind of get away from it. And I'm like, it's a photograph, right? So we did some work on mental rehearsal, and not on like, we didn't throw her in a snake pit. We didn't, force her to hold snakes or anything like that. What we did is we put her in a situation in her imagination where it just didn't matter. She was able to calmly do it. And with her specifically, what she did is she would see the snake image, she would replace it with a kitten and feel good about it, and then slowly allow that snake to slowly allow the kitten to transform back into a snake, but hold on to the feeling of the kitten, which was very non-threatening to her. Now, she doesn't have a pet snaker anymore and she still loves cats, but the whole point was she didn't want to be afraid of snakes.
I bet that way lasts longer as well, because I'm not saying I could go to a new glass floor and walk across it straight away. It'd still be fighting in my own head to do it. So I think that the way that you're saying is a lot more helpful, because actually once you've dealt with that in your mind, you can deal with it in multiple situations where if you're constantly forcing things, not only does it not translate to other situations, but it can build anxiety, because if you go near that situation again, you're going to have that fight again. So that's something. And as well, if you're if maybe that glass floor is an obstacle, then heights might be. So to deal with heights might be the best thing rather than so it's actually really, it becomes quite difficult and anxiety inducing to kind of keep on going over that same thing when you're coming to the same obstacle. Whereas when you're saying, well, actually we can remove the obstacle. Yeah. That's huge. That's way more productive.
Yeah. Because if we are thinking of overcoming the obstacle, all of our attention's still on the obstacle. If we intentionally remove the obstacle or allow the obstacle to die from lack of nourishment because we're focusing our attention on the end result, then that is a much more, I'm not even sure what the right word is. It's a much, I find it to be more effective. It's more pleasant. And you're right. I think it does last longer because the example you just gave, what would happen if you went to another glass floor? Or have you seen that there's a bridge, I think it's like in China.
Oh yeah.
It goes across a canyon and it's like several hundred meters down and the entire bridge is glass. You know, that's a big difference than standing on a 4-foot square of glass, you know, 50 stories up. So to overcome that by allowing it to just sort of dissolve, I think it works better for me. And I use that approach as a strongman because if I'm working on feats of strength, I have to constantly be aware of what my true physical limit is versus what my mental assignment of a limitation is. With the nail drive that I spoke of earlier, I had assigned a limitation subconsciously on this, and I was able to remove that limitation. But if I attempted to drive that nail through, you know, a half-inch thick steel plate, things don't turn out the same way because the obstacle is not the issue. Am I making sense? I feel like I'm kind of rambling on that one.
Yeah, no, I think that makes complete sense because we limit ourselves in many, many ways, and we almost kind of speed limit ourselves on everything that we're doing. And then to be able to, because there's a big difference between your mental limit and your physical limit. You can push your body a hell of a lot more than what you think you can actually do it. You might think, oh, I can't get to the top of that hill, but your body could get to the top of the hill and then carry on, because we completely underestimate what we're capable of. And therefore we can never reach our true potential, because if we keep on limiting ourselves like that, we can't achieve what we could potentially achieve. And that goes for things like entrepreneurs and for physical sports.
Absolutely. The thing about taking the ideas from strongman training of being able to bend steel or rip decks of cards or whatever, and applying them to those other goals is by doing these physical things, the way that makes sense to train a physical body is not to go all out wide open all the time, because we need recovery. And I am firmly of the belief that the minimum amount of training necessary to get the desired result is the best way to go. Because if it's anything more than the minimum amount, then it's extra and it doesn't really contribute anything. And it actually detracts from your ability to recover from whatever you're doing, especially if we're talking about feats of strength. Because on a physical level, the fastest thing that will improve if you exercise will be your cardiorespiratory system. Very easy to make great gains in that very quickly. The next fastest thing will be your muscular system. Pretty simple and pretty easy to make gains in muscular strength. Your tendons and your ligaments adapt much more slowly. Now, those first two things, the faster you can get there, the faster it'll go away. Tendons and ligaments, because physiologically have less of a blood supply than the heart and lungs or the muscles, it takes them longer to adapt and to get thicker and stronger. But it also takes them longer, or it will take longer for you to lose that adaptation. Applying that kind of logic to anything entrepreneurial or anything in regards to changing beliefs about fears or prejudices or anxieties, applying that belief to improving relationships, that, okay, there are some things that will change very rapidly and then they can change back very rapidly. But the important part, for feats of strength, is the tendon and ligament strength. Because if your muscles outrun your tendons and ligaments, your tendons or ligaments will get damaged because your muscles were too strong. That's why we see people who use a lot of performance enhancing drugs, steroids, that kind of stuff, will very often suffer tendon and ligament injuries because their muscles have gotten stronger than their body can support their tendons and ligaments. The engine in the car is such that it has more power than the frame of the car can withstand. So if we build that strong frame physically, then the muscle strength can fluctuate, but that tendon and ligament strength tends to stay the same. I find that those same concepts apply in our mind. There are some things that are going to very rapidly change, and there are some things that will take a longer time to change. And the things that change very rapidly can change back very rapidly. The things that change slowly over time tend to stay changed. And as a result of that, they influence the things that fluctuate more rapidly. And so there becomes less of a rapid change there. That's the big difference. It's quite simple, although that doesn't mean that it's easy, because simplicity and persistence over time are the two big factors, not the incredible drive to go wide open right now, and then in 3 days you're out of steam. It has to be done over time for it to last. And I use this as an illustration to do that. I got a brand new pack of playing cards here. I wanted to make sure that I could do something like this for your viewers, listeners. So brand new pack. I just took it out of the deck, or took it out of the box. When I was first learning how to do this feat, I couldn't do a full deck. So I was able to do, let me find the middle of the deck. I was able to do a half a deck, right? And the feat itself is going to be ripping a deck of cards in half. So I was able to do this. I was unable to do this, which is twice as much. Well, this really lends itself to an illustration of intelligent progression, because when I was ripping half a deck, it was pretty easy. Not like I didn't have to think about it, but it was pretty easy. So I spent some time with that, a week or so. And then I took a single card and added it to the stack. I have the instructions and the jokers in here, so these numbers will be a little bit off. But if there's 52 cards in a deck, and I can rip a half a deck, that means I can rip 26 cards. If I add one to that, that's 27. I add another one, that's 28. If there are 52 weeks in a year, and I add one card per week to my training session, and I do, 4 or 5 decks each training session, then over the course of 6 months, what was once 26 cards has become 52 cards, and the level of effort and the level of threat coming back is identical. And so we wind up in a place where I can take a brand new deck of cards, and without much fanfare, without having to gas myself up, without having to psych myself out or punch myself in the face, or, eat a bucket of chalk like you see a lot of lifters do when they're psyching up for a lift, I can not just rip it into halves, but rip it into quarters. And I will frequently do that. And people say, you made it look easy. Well, that's because it is easy. It's because I have invested in this foundation of technical practice, muscular and neurological strength, and also conditioning the tissues, my skin, my tendons, my ligaments, to be able to withstand the forces that are necessary to do that. So I make it look easy because it is easy. There are certainly much harder feats that I could do, and I do those, but very rarely do I do them in front of people. Typically when I do something, it's something that is relatively easy for me because I've been practicing it. That mentality of this is where I am, and I can add a tiny little bit, infinitesimal bit of increase in the direction that I want to go. And over a very short period of time, if I do it consistently, I'll be where I wanted to be without a lot of effort. But it all comes initially from the belief that I can arrive there in the first place. And being able to do something relatively easily, and then adding an infinitesimal, one of my mentors calls it creeping incrementalism, to incrementally creep toward the desired lift or the desired feat by adding those tiny little bits of resistance, is the best way to go. In my experience with strength training, we can do that with mental training as well. It's all the same principles.
Well, I'm completely shocked. I thought that was fantastic. And that is such an
Thank you.
amazing lesson for us to end on, because again, we've gone way over time. Because I'm just so interested in this. It's fascinating. So I know that you got a book coming out, and actually I think it's already out, isn't it? And you've got some places on the internet where people can come and find you. We will link these directly below so you can click straight through. Just let people know where they can find you.
Sure thing. The book It is out. It has been out for several years now. It's called Superhuman You. And if you are outside of the continental US, you can get it on Amazon or on lulu.com. If you're in the continental US, I have an offer set up that if you go to superhumanyobook.com, I'll send you a copy for free. I just ask that you pay for shipping and handling, which is at like $10. That covers my printing costs, my postage, all that kind of stuff, because I would love to just completely give it away. But if I do that, then I'm paying you to read my book. And, I would rather give you the book, but I don't want to go into a loss doing that. So in the continental US, superhumanyobook.com. Outside of the continental US, it's on Amazon and Lulu. If you're interested in knowing more about the coaching aspect of what I do, superhumanyocoaching.com has a quick little presentation. It's about 45 minutes long that you can watch. It tells more detail of my backstory, how I arrived at the position that I'm in now. But most importantly, how all that affects you and what you want to do. Because, it's real cool that I've got my stuff the way that I want it to be, but how can I help you? And that's what I'm most interested in. So superhumanyocoaching.com has that information, and like any social media that you can think of that I'm on. I'm not on everything, but I'm on most things. If you just look for Iron Tamer Dave Whitley, you'll find me.
Well, that's fantastic. Thank you so much, Dave. It's been fascinating having you on a podcast. It's been a really, really interesting episode. And thank you so much for doing that rip of the deck of cards. I'm going to remember that.
Thank you so much.
You've been watching on YouTube or listening on an audio platform to the Kuno podcast. If you like what you're hearing, then don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any amazing content. And don't forget to leave us a review.
Kuno coaching.